Hello, and welcome to another edition of From the Desk of. I'm Jim Cohen, CEO of Minneapolis Jewish Federation, and I am delighted to be joined today by two of my favorite people to work with in the whole world, and I actually mean it. Robin Neidorf, who is Chief Changemaker at Roadmap to Impact, who we have retained as a consultant for quite some time, but has a long history with Federation, having served on our board and our executive committee, and actually did a stint as acting Director of Community Impact way back in the day. So welcome, Robin. And Marisa Gage, our Director of Community Impact today. So I'm so glad to have you both. Thank you for taking the time. We're talking today about impact-focused funding, and this is really the culmination of many years of intense work, on, off, start, stop, COVID interrupting, etc. So Robin, I want to ask you first, how did we get here? If you could give us just a brief history of how Federation has looked at changing its allocations paradigm for the better. How did we show up at this moment?
Well, to start by clarifying where we are today, we're in year 2 of a pilot in which we're trying to better align grant making. This has been, as you said, a long process. I've been involved with it even before I was a consultant over the last couple of years as a volunteer working in strategic planning, where we were looking at different models, as many federations around the country are, looking at different ways of doing grant making. There was a strong push towards perhaps moving towards programmatic funding. There's a lot of push to maintain unrestricted funding to make sure that organizations have the greatest flexibility that they need. And throughout many years, there was back and forth about different approaches to do this. We tried a number of things, nothing really stuck. And I believe that when you brought me in as a consultant, what that shifted was that I was able to put really a lot of dedicated time and my professional skills to work, shaping the project, building the trust that we needed on the stakeholders and the organizations, and get to the place where we could get a plan approved and then into the pilot that we're in now.
I'm going to get to you, Marisa, in just a second. I want to touch on one thing that you said, Robin, and that was one of the pushes and pulls on this whole process, and the emphasis that we have within it is this notion of completely unrestricted funding versus programmatic dollars. And I think that the crises that we've had in recent years have really demonstrated to professionals, lay people, and donors alike that we do have to protect for all of our partners a significant amount of unrestricted dollars, because you don't know what's going to happen. As a professional working in this space and as a consultant, have you seen that trend back to the need to protect that?
Absolutely. And for one, I'm really glad to see that trend. I think that there's a fundamental purpose for federations and for federation-like organizations to raise the bottom so that all organizations have a stronger base from which they can operate. And when crisis hits, as you say, that's the time when you don't know what those needs are going to be, whether those are COVID related or social related. Suddenly there are needs that nobody anticipated and couldn't have designed a program for back when the grant cycle was.
Right. And I think that one of the keys to everything that we've tried to do over the years, and as I said before, it started and stopped, is fundamentally about flexibility and our ability to really be relevant. And by relevant, I mean addressing the needs as they happen. And by creating more flexibility, which we're going to get to, we're able to do that much more effectively and stay relevant. So, Marisa, you are currently the Director of Community Impact and work in this pilot, as Robin mentioned, day in and day out. We're in the midst of it. Tell us a little bit, and for our listeners that don't know a lot about it, what we actually mean by impact-focused funding. How is it changing our allocations paradigm, and a little bit of the difference between giving to Federation today a completely unrestricted gift or having the option to give an impact-focused gift?
Yeah. Thank you so much for the question, Jim. I am a gardener, and so I'm going to be employing a perhaps a little bit of a pained metaphor. And what I think about is we as Federation are sort of like a gardener, and we are charged with tending a group of plants that are all doing different things really well. And when we are talking about philanthropy, when we give unrestricted dollars, that basically gives organizations the opportunity to do whatever it is that they're doing best. If I want to be the best tomato plant I can be, if I'm going to grow beets, that's amazing. And I'm going to be the best beet grower that I can be. Some people, though, say, I'm allergic to nightshade. So as much fun as it would be to have tomatoes and peppers, that's really not what I want to grow. I'd love to do kale and collards and Brussels sprouts. And sometimes we step back and we take a look and we say, my goodness, the plants are doing really well, but the pots in which they live are in disrepair, or the soil needs to be amended, or we notice that the sun isn't shining in the way that we would want it to shine. And that is really those untold issues that organizations have, those gaps in funding, those things that only an umbrella organization can identify, taking stock of each individual plant individually, but then also in total. And that's a real niche, right? That's not for everybody. But for the folks for whom it is important, we want to be able to say, this is the thing that we were able to change. This was the variable that we're measuring. And this is the impact that it had over time. Otherwise, we can't be too sure what was it that actually encouraged or enhanced this organization's ability to provide on its mission. Was it this fund? Was it this program? Was it perhaps a change in leadership? This is our opportunity to take a step back, evaluate, and really say to a donor, this is the measurable impact that we know your gift had on this organization or on this group of organizations.
So first, it's evident that you and I have been working together for a long time. For those of you who don't know, I'm allergic to nightshades. So thank you for that shout out, Marisa. Give us an example, if you could, specifically some things that we are able to accomplish or that we're able to show a donor who's interested in it as a result of testing out this impact focused funding model. How does it look a little different than it would have a few years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that is new and unique about impact focused funding is our relationship with the partner organizations. And Robin has been a fantastic mentor in modeling how we can work with organizations to identify metrics that they believe are positive, that we believe are positive, and then we can action towards reaching that goal. So and we did this in partnership, not just with organizations, but with community members. We did a design phase that took over a year where we included literally hundreds of stakeholders who came together.
The question that we put to the groups was describing the most thriving future of the Minneapolis Jewish community. So if they were to design what the most thriving future of the Minneapolis Jewish community looked like, we were then able to put together some characteristics and then work backwards from there to say, okay, if that's what we want to look like, what is it we need to be funding today to get there?
One of the things that I'm most pleased about how we've gone about this is that two things really. One is that we took our time because we realized that because we have been talking about this for so long, predates me, it predates you, it predates Marisa, that we wanted to get it right. And so we've taken our time and done the homework and are testing things. But the second is that, to your point, both of your points, we've really incorporated feedback and organic thought from our partners, that this is not something that has been thrust upon them, but they really have been part of the conversation, as it should be. So, Robin, two questions for you related to that. The first is, Marisa referenced that we had a lot of listening sessions and workshops with representatives from all of our allocations recipients. What did you learn from them that was most surprising, that had an impact on how we went about building this? And the second question, one of the hats that you've worn as a lay leader at Federation over the years was that you spearheaded a lot of the work we did around our Kadima campaign, which was for COVID relief, which brought together almost 30 organizations in the community. Were there lessons learned there that also fed into the thinking as we developed impact-focused funding?
Those are actually very related questions, so thank you for putting them at the same time. I think that the thing that came out of the listening sessions, it wasn't so much a surprise, but it was a real strong validation, was that partners were so pleased to be at the table. They really wanted to do this work with us. And it was time consuming. I mean, it wasn't like, a 5-minute conversation. We asked them to come to a number of meetings. We had one-on-one conversations with every partner. And there was some concern in the people that were involved with the project design of, well, we're asking too much of the partners. But because we were doing it in a very authentic way and a very transparent way, they trusted us. They trusted that we were using their time well, and they felt heard. And I think out of the Kadima process, that was one of the greatest takeaways I got from that, is that by providing a space where leaders of organizations could come together in what was a time of crisis and feel heard, not necessarily in each meeting need to solve anything, not need to prove anything, not need to make decisions at that moment, but simply to come together and be heard individually and collectively on, this is the pain we're feeling right now. And what came out of the listening sessions, which was a bit of surprise in some ways, but not looking back on it, was the number one need that came out across the board, every single organization we talked to came out with this need, which was to invest more in their professional team. And this is something that federations haven't generally funded. It kind of falls into that unrestricted funding bucket that organizations can do what they want in that bucket with, to support their professionals. But because we designed impact focused funding to say, you can do anything you want as long as it's supporting your professionals. And then, as Marisa said, come up with some metrics that meant more meaningful to them so that we could look at how it was going. They have complete autonomy to design what that looks like. We're not asking them to take on a certain program or approach or certain types of things. And that too is that both structure plus flexibility that seems to really make a difference.
I have heard only positive feedback from my colleagues about the sense of autonomy that they feel, that this is not something that is being mandated, quote unquote, but a recognition that there is a need and that the need is different at every organization, but yet everybody has a similar need in that being a Jewish professional in 2025 ain't easy. The work isn't easy. And if we want to have a community that continues to thrive and to grow, we have to have people who are A, willing to work in it, and B, who have the tools that are necessary in order to be successful. And I'll be honest, one of the things that I have been a little bit surprised about, maybe I'm not so surprised, but the fact that we still need to explain that to folks, that it doesn't automatically occur to people that none of this takes place in a vacuum. And I think that by us doubling down and saying Federation thinks this is important is yet another opportunity to remind people of that importance. And if impact focused funding was able to do that, I think that's terrific.
The thing that I always say is the people are the program. No people, no program.
Yeah.
And if you want the best and the brightest entering this field and staying here and developing their careers in this field, we as a community have a responsibility to make that a very attractive option.
I think one of the real benefits that came out of the process, Robin, as well, was the realization that there is a Jewish communal field in the Twin Cities. And we saw the looks of revelation when organizations would diagnose a problem and a light bulb would go on because everyone else in the room had that exact same problem. And it might have looked a little different, but they were experiencing it too. We also, as part of this endeavor, tried to get a number, an estimate of just how many people it takes to make the Jewish community run. Because when we talk about Jewish communal professionals, some of these folks are really easy. Your local rabbi, the camp counselor. But a lot of those folks are people who are taking care of our seniors in Shalom. They are people who are working with people with disabilities. There are finance professionals. There are wonderful security professionals. They're the people who come in and clean our buildings. And it takes thousands of people. It takes over 2,000 people to make the Minneapolis Jewish community run.
Well, when you put it in those terms, it's eye-opening. And for many people, not that anybody, I think, would dispute that, it takes a village, to use a far too often used expression. But when you put it in those terms, it really hits home that this doesn't happen by accident and that there's a lot of planning that has to go into it. So, Marisa, we've talked a little bit about how the Impact Focus Funding project has identified this need amongst our partners for continued professional development and the creation or the further establishment of opportunities for them. I want to shift focus a little bit and talk about other things that I know our listeners care about and how this positively impacts other parts of Jewish life that they care about. And the two that come to mind most are education and Jewish summer camp. So walk us through a little bit about how, by going through this pilot and by re-examining how we allocate funds, our partners in those spaces are seeing the benefits.
This is an opportunity to really get into the nitty-gritty. We've discussed a lot about sort of what are we doing, and maybe somebody's thinking, well, give me an example. And so I'd like to speak to your first point about Jewish education.
Please.
But what the educators told us, and I think this makes a lot of sense, right? We know that high quality educators are going to give a really high quality product that's going to result in learners who are active, engaged, confident, proud. But there's a lot of stuff that happens in education that we don't see. And something that I didn't know and that I learned about through impact focused funding was that many of the folks in our supplemental schools in particular are not compensated for all of the lesson planning that they do. They're only compensated for their hours teaching, their hours in the building, But if I'm an educator and I'm trying to put together a lesson plan, that takes a lot of investment. And so one of our organizations said, we would love to expand our compensation to all of our educators so that they are receiving remuneration for the time that they're using to prepare these high quality lessons. And we heard from the organizations that this was not just the incredible confidence that this gave educators, the boost in morale, the feeling of being seen, the feeling of acknowledging that their labor is valuable. And then the opportunity to invest resources in something that they wouldn't have had the opportunity to do otherwise. And being able to track that then over several years and say, wow, retention rates are leveling off and going up. People see themselves wanting to stay in the field longer. And what's amazing about this organization is that they are seeing their attendance go up and up and up. I was speaking with a colleague at this organization earlier, and they're talking about we have more third graders than we have weeks in the year.
That's incredible. And again, it's not just about the professionals who are delivering the high quality product, which is very important, but it's the product. And the fact that we have the data to show that the product is improving and therefore attendance is improving because the kid and his or her parents feel that they are learning more in the classroom. That's what we're really trying to get at. And as a partner to supplemental schools, that really shows, that this is starting to have a very positive impact. Yeah. Tell us about camp, Robin.
In Camp Scholarships, the community program for Camp Scholarships has been one of the popular programs through Federation for a long time. It's the only place where the entire community, regardless of their affiliation, can put in a single application for Camp Scholarships for any Jewish camp. We knew that the amounts that we had available for scholarships were not adequate. And so our goal in impact focused funding was to raise the floor. We wanted to be guaranteed that for the period of the pilot, 3 years of the pilot, we would have at least X amount of dollars to give out. And that was going to create a lot more flexibility in terms of being able to give awards earlier in the year so that families weren't waiting until March or April to find out if they'd received scholarships. By having this higher base, we went from being able to give somewhere in the neighborhood of $120,000 a year to more like $280,000 a year.
And this year, spoiler alert, it's in excess of $300,000 a year.
This program
this year
grows and grows. And in a parallel track, we also spent some time really looking at the approach that we make to decision making at Camp Scholarships, making that more transparent to families, clearer to understand what criteria that were being used to make decisions, and weighting things in certain ways so that we could really make sure that the funds were going to the families that needed it most.
That's what families have asked us. And, as I said, spoiler alert, because we haven't announced this year's numbers yet, but assuming that the board approves of this year's budget, the number is going to go up, and it still is not enough to cover the need. And so this is something that we're going to be talking about for a long time. But the fact that we are making a serious dent and that we continue to try and grow it, I think is critical. I want to ask a specific question to help demystify this process, because admittedly, it's somewhat complicated. It has to be, because, I joke that the great thing about Federation is that we do so many things, and the bad thing about Federations, we have to describe how we do so many things. But for our listeners who are looking to have a better understanding, walk us through very quickly how impact focused funding fits into our annual campaign. Are there differences? When someone writes a check, where does the money go?
So as Federation, we run on our community campaign and the unrestricted dollars that were raised. And because this is a pilot and we were testing something out, we wanted to provide a level of stability for our partners. So all of the impact focused funding dollars that we're raising are plus dollars, in addition to what they're receiving from their annual unrestricted grant. And it gives the donors a lot of autonomy to be able to match their passions with the change that they want to see in the community. So if I'm really passionate about summer camp, if I'm passionate about Jewish education or building a overseas local connection, I can give a gift to impact focused funding and directly to that bucket. I could give to a number of different buckets. And then I have a really great way of saying, this is the impact of my gift over this period of time. This is how it impacted organizations. And this is how they might evolve in the future with their various projects.
And it also gives people an opportunity, I guess, to focus not just on things that they're passionate about, but things that they feel are currently underfunded.
Exactly. It's an additional way for us to drive community progress in certain areas.
And just to go back to a comment that Marisa made earlier about, Federation having this unique view on the community. There's no other organization in the community that's going to get that bird's eye view of what does the community need. So as important as it is that we give these individual grants to each organization that we support, it's just as important that we're seeing this holistic view. And impact focused funding is one mechanism that we're trying to provide some more detailed funding in a particular area that's been identified, while at the same time enabling the unrestricted grants that organizations rely on.
Yeah, we talked before about how one of the things that we've learned over the past couple of years is that the importance of unrestricted dollars has not gone away, and we're not going to abandon that. But at the same time, this is very helpful information for us to understand what the needs are, and not to speak in negative terms, but also what the community cares about. And ultimately, people vote with their feet. They also vote with their pocketbook. And if we float something through the impact focused funding mechanism that doesn't resonate, we need to know that also, because at the end of the day, everything that we do is thanks to the generosity of our donors. And if something is not resonating, we either A, need to move on to something else, or B, figure out how to communicate it more effectively to demonstrate why it actually is important. So it keeps us on our toes also, which is important. We're running out of time. I'm going to let you guys go in a second. I'm going to ask one last question of both of you. In 30 seconds or less, when this pilot is over, what do you hope we will have accomplished, or where would you like our organization and our community to be? And Robin, I'll start with you.
I think my main goals we have already accomplished, which is partnering closely with every organization that receives grants from Federation and having a true partnership of equals to understand what the needs are and where our community can go to be the healthiest version of itself.
Terrific. And Marisa?
I think we're really on to something here. I think this is something that's only happening in Minneapolis. And I think by the end of it, we are going to have feedback, not just from the various programs that our partners ran, but from those partners, from the people that it impacted, to show that this is going to be a real feather in our cap. This is a model that we can take forward, not just for this pilot period, but into other forms of grant making. And it was made here in Minneapolis, and I'm really excited to be able to share it out with others.
Well, a Made in Minneapolis label is always very valuable. I thank you both very much for your time, and I reserve the right that some date in the future, we're going to have you back at this table to see how things are going and to see if your hopes come to fruition. And until then, I hope to join you all next month, and I'll be sitting here at the desk of. Bye now.